What do you do when you want to avoid? Well, if you're like me, you employ avoidance tactics. There are many different types of avoidance tactics. One I want to look at today is deflection. Deflecting can look like blame. It can look like minimizing. Deflecting can look like over-spiritualizing, changing the subject. You can avoid by using humor. Instead of confronting something head-on, making a joke of it. You can blanket everything in positivity to avoid. You can catastrophize to avoid. It's amazing how many things we can use to avoid. All these different ways to avoid produce very specific outcomes in relationship. And while it may be very tempting to avoid in the moment, let's take a look at the long-term effects of using avoidance strategies. Deflection can be grounded in a lot of things. It could be insecurity. It could be, I'm not sure. It could be just, I don't care. There could be a lot of different things. It really doesn't matter where your deflection is coming from. The first thing that it results in is a lack of accountability. When I'm deflecting, when you're deflecting, there's no accountability. And when there's a lack of accountability, there's also a lack of growth. You can't grow if you have no ownership. And deflection interferes with ownership. It undermines ownership. You can't deflect and own at the same time. And when you're not owning, you're not growing. There's no way to course correct if you can't own where you are or what you've created or contributed to relationally or results-wise. Deflection will undermine trust. Think about it this way. When people feel like their inquiry, their question, their conversation is being evaded or avoided, then they're naturally going to become more suspicious. It's fertile ground for suspicion when there is deflection and avoidance. The person that you're with starts to wonder, what else are they not saying? What else is being avoided apart from this one thing that we're really looking at together, and we can't quite get to ground truth because there's so much deflection and avoidance. Again, there's no ownership. And if there's no ownership, what kind of relationship is available? Not much of one. So instead of bringing ourselves to the relationship, honestly, openly, vulnerably, the deflection brings our avatar. It brings another version that isn't real. It's a way of saying, I'm unavailable for relationship. I'm unavailable to be with you in this moment because I'm busy deflecting. Avoidance strategies contribute to communication breakdowns. So many times when I'm working with a client or a team and there's a communication breakdown, as we start to unpack it and do forensics around the breakdown, there is always an avoidance mechanism or 2 or 10 in place. It could be deflection. It could be, I didn't have the conversation. It could be silence. There's a lot of ways that people avoid in relationships at home and at work. And when we do that, it will inevitably lead to a communication breakdown. Because the thing that we avoid, whether it's in ourselves or it's a topic, isn't going anywhere. It's going to stay there and it's going to become a landmine that then we all try to navigate around. And that is very expensive work. It takes a lot of time and a lot of energy. Chances are if your team is employing a lot of avoidance tactics, there's a lot of money left on the table. There's a lot of expense in terms of energy and time that gets diverted over to maintaining the avoidance versus doing the thing that we're all here to do together in creating value for our clients and stakeholders. When we get really familiar with and indulgent in avoidance tactics, it will ultimately damage our reputation. It lets people know, hey, this is what you can expect from me. I'm going to avoid. I'm not going to tackle things head on. It's going to take a lot of time to get to ground truth if we ever get there because of the avoidance. If you care about your reputation, about who you are in this world, you may want to pay attention to how often you use avoidance tactics and when and why you use them. The last thing is our avoidance tactics tend to escalate conflict. I know sometimes When I'm avoiding, in my mind, I think, oh, I'm just avoiding because I don't want to have conflict, or I want to avoid or minimize conflict. But the reality is, when we're employing avoidance tactics, we end up escalating the conflict because whatever is there isn't going away. And it's usually getting worse by the moment as we continue to deflect or put the blame somewhere else. As people like to say, the elephant in the room, if we don't name it, it will continue to absorb our attention and our focus and our energy, and ultimately will escalate the conflict at hand. So ask yourself today, when and where am I avoiding? How do I like to avoid? What's my favorite avoidance tactic? And maybe if it is deflection, reconsider ownership. How can you step in and own the situation, your impact, the results, in a way that will produce something new? If you got to see yourself, or maybe someone else in this video, like, subscribe, ring the bell for notifications, make a comment. I would love to hear from you about other topics or how this applied to you personally. And if this was helpful for you, check out this video.